Final chapter. My present situation was one in which all voluntary thought was swallowed up and lost. I was hurried away by fury. Revenge alone endowed me with the strength and composure. It modelled my feelings and allowed me to be calculating and calm, at periods when otherwise delirium or death would have been my portion. My first resolution was to quit Geneva for ever. My country, which when I was happy and beloved was dear to me, now in my adversity became hateful. I provided myself with a sum of money, together with a few jewels which had belonged to my mother, and departed. And now my wanderings began, which are to cease but with life. I have traversed a vast portion of the earth, and have endured all the hardships which travellers in deserts and barbarous countries are wont to meet. How I have lived I hardly know. Many times I have stretched my falling limbs upon sandy plains and prayed for death, but revenge kept me alive. I dared not die and leave my adversary in being. When I quitted Geneva, my first labour was to gain some clue by which I might trace the steps of my fiendish enemy. But my plan was unsettled, and I wandered many hours around the confines of the town, uncertain what path I should pursue. As night approached, I found myself at the entrance of the cemetery, where William, Elizabeth, and my father reposed. I entered it and approached the tomb which marked their graves. Everything was silent except for the leaves, the trees, which were gently agitated by the wind. The night was nearly dark, and the scene would have been solemn and affecting, even to an uninterested observer. The spirits of the departed seemed to flit around and to cast a shadow which was felt but not seen around the head of the mourner. The deep grief which is this scene had at first excited quickly gave way to rage and despair. They were dead and I lived. Their murderers also lived, and to destroy him I must drag out my weary existence. I knelt on the grass, kissed the earth, and with quivering lips exclaimed, "By the sacred earth on which I kneel, by the shades that wander near me, by the deep and eternal grief that I feel, I swear, and by thee, O night, and by the spirits that preside over thee, I swear to pursue that demon who caused this misery, until he or I shall perish in mortal conflict. For this purpose I will preserve my life, to execute this dear revenge, and I will again behold the sun and tread the green herbage of the earth, which otherwise should vanish from my eyes for ever. And I call upon you, spirits of the dead, and on you, wandering ministers of vengeance, to aid and conduct me in my work. Let the cursed and the hellish monster drink deep of agony, and let him feel the despair that now torments me." I had begun my journey with solemnity and an awe which almost assured me that the shadows of my murdered friends heard and approved of my devotion. But the furies possessed me, and as I concluded, and rage choked my utterance, I was answered through the stillness of the night by a loud and fiendish laugh. It rang on my ears, long and heavy. The mountains re-echoed it, and I felt as if all hell surrounded me with mockery and laughter. Surely in that moment I should have been possessed by frenzy and have destroyed my miserable existence, but that my vow was heard, and that I was reserved for vengeance, the laughter died away, and when a well-known and abhorrent voice, apparently close to my ear, addressed me in audible whisper, "I am satisfied, miserable wretch, you have determined to live, and I am satisfied." I darted towards the spot from which the sound proceeded, but the devil eluded my grasp. Suddenly the broad disk of the moon arose and shone full upon his ghastly and distorted shape as he fled with more and more speed. I pursued him, and for many months this had been my task. Guided by a slight clue, I followed the winding of the Rhone, but vainly. The blue Mediterranean appeared, and by a strange chance I saw the fiend enter by night and hide himself in a vessel bound for the Black Sea. I took my passage in the same ship, but he escaped, I know not how. Amidst the wiles of the Tartary and Russia, although he still evaded me, I have ever followed in his track. Sometimes the peasants, scared by his horrid appearance, informed me of his path. Sometimes he himself, who feared that if I lost the trace I should despair and die. Often he left some mark to guide me. The snows descended on my head, and I saw the print of his huge step on the white plain. To you first entering on life, to whom care is new and agony unknown, how can you understand what I have felt and still feel? Cold, want and fatigue were the least pains which I was destined to endure. I was cursed by some devil and carried about with me my eternal hell, yet still a spirit of good followed and directed my steps, and when I almost moaned that it would suddenly extricate me from seemingly insurmountable difficulties. Sometimes when nature overcame by hunger sunk under the exhaustion, a repast was prepared for me in the desert that restored me and inspired me. The fare was indeed coarse, such as the peasants of the country ate, but I may not doubt that it was set there by the spirit that had invoked me to aid me. Often, when all was dry and the heavens cloudless, and I was parched by thirst, a slight cloud would come into the sky and shed a few drops that revived me and vanished. I followed when I could the courses of the river, but the demon generally avoided these, and as it was here that the population of the country chiefly collected, in other places human beings were seldom seen, and I generally subsisted on wild animals that crossed my path. I had money with me and gained the friendship of the villagers by distributing it, or bringing with me some food that I had killed, which after taking a small part I always presented to those who had provided me with fire and utensils for cooking. My life, as it passed thus, was indeed hateful to me, and it was during sleep alone that I could taste joy. O blessed sleep! Often, when most miserable, I sank into repose, and my dreams lulled me to rapture. The spirits that guarded me had provided these moments, or rather hours of happiness, and I might retain strength to fulfil my pilgrimage. Deprived of this respite, I should have sunk under my hardship. During the day, I was sustained and inspired by the hope of night, for in sleep I saw my friends, my wife, my beloved country again, and I saw the benevolent countenance of my father, heard the silver tones of my Elizabeth's voice, and beheld Cleverall enjoying health and youth. Often, when wearied by toilsome march, I persuaded myself that I was dreaming until night should come, and that I should then enjoy the reality in the arms of my dearest friends. What agonizing fondness did I feel for them! How did I cling to their dear forms as something haunting even my waking hours, and persuade myself that they still lived. At such moments vengeance that burned within me died in my heart, and I pursued my path towards the destruction of the demon, more than a task enjoyed by heaven, as the mechanical impulse of some power of which I was unconscious, than as the ardent desire of my soul. What his feelings were, whom I pursued, I cannot know. Sometimes, indeed, he left marks in writing on the barks of trees, or cut in stone, that guided me and intrigued my fury. My reign is not yet over. These words were legible in one of these inscriptions. You live, and my power is complete. Follow me, I seek the everlasting ices of the north, where you will feel the misery of cold and frost, to which I am impassive. You will find near this place, if you follow not too tardily, a dead hare. Eat and be refreshed. Come on, my enemy, we have yet to wrestle for our lives, but many a hard and miserable hours you must endure until that period shall arrive. Scoffing devil, again I do avow vengeance, again I do devote the miserable fiend to torture and death. Never will I admit my search until he or I perish, and then with what ecstasy shall I join my Elizabeth, and those who even now prepare me for the reward of my tedious toil and horrible pilgrimage. As I still pursued my journey on the northward, the snows thickened and the cold increased in degrees almost too severe to support. The peasants were shut up in their hovels, and only a few of the most hardy adventurers forced to seize the animals, whom starvation had forced from their hiding place to seek for prey. The rivers were covered with ice, and no fish could be procured, and thus I was cut off from my chief article of maintenance. The triumph of my enemy increased with the difficulty of my labours. One inscription he left was in these words: "Prepare, your toils only begin. Wrap yourself in furs and provide food, for we shall soon enter upon the journey where your sufferings will satisfy my everlasting hatred." My courage and perseverance were invigorated by these scoffing words. I resolved not to fail in my purpose, and calling on heaven to support me, I continued with unabated fervour to traverse immense deserts until the oceans appeared at a distance and formed the utmost boundary of the horizon. Oh, how unlike it was to the blue seas of the south. Covered with ice, it was only to be disguised from land by its superior wildness and ruggedness. The Greeks wept for joy when they beheld the Mediterranean from the hills of Asia, and hailed with rapture the boundary of these hills. I did not weep, but I knelt down and with a full heart thanked my guiding spirit for conducting me into safety to the place where I hoped, notwithstanding my adversary's glib, to meet and grapple with him. Some weeks before this period I had procured a sledge and dogs, and thus traversed the snows with inconceivable speed. I know not whether the fiend possessed the same advantages, but I found that, as before, I had daily lost ground in the pursuit. I now gained on him, so much so that when I first saw the ocean he was but 1 day's journey in advance, and I hoped to intercept him before he should reach the beach. When the new courage, therefore, I pressed on, and in 2 days arrived at the wretched hamlet on the seashore. I inquired of the inhabitants concerning the fiend, and gained accurate information. A gigantic monster, they said, had arrived the night before, with a gun and many pistols, putting to flight the inhabitants of the solitary cottage through fear of his terrific appearance. He had carried off their store of winter food, and placing it in the sledge to draw, which he had seized on a numerous drove of trained dogs. He had harnessed them, and the same night, to the joy of the horror-stricken villagers, had pursued his journey across the sea in the direction that led to no land, and they conjectured that he must speedily be destroyed by the breaking of the ice, or frozen by the internal frosts. On hearing this information, I suffered a temporary access of despair. He had escaped me, and I must commence to a destructive and almost endless journey across the mountainous ices of the ocean, amidst cold that few of the inhabitants could long endure, and which I, the native of the genial and sunny climate, could not hope to survive. Yet at the idea that the fiend should live and be triumphant, my rage and vengeance returned like a mighty tide, overwhelmed every other feeling. After a slight repose, during which the spirits of the dead hovered around and instigated me to toil and revenge, I prepared for my journey. I exchanged my land sledge for one fashioned for the inequalities of the frozen ocean, and purchasing a plentiful stock of provision, I departed from land. I cannot guess how many days have passed since then, but I have endured misery which nothing but the internal sentiment of just retribution burning with me in my heart could have enabled me to support. Immense and rugged mountains of ice often barred my passage, and often I heard the thunder of the ground sea, which threatened my destruction. But again the frost came and made the pass of the sea secure. By the quantity of provision which I had consumed, I should guess that I had passed 3 weeks in this journey, and the continued protraction of hope returning back upon the heart often wrung bitter drops of despondency and grief from my eyes. Despair had indeed almost secured her prey, and I should soon have sunk beneath this misery, when once, after the poor animals that carried me had with incredible toil gained the summit of the sloping ice mountain, and one sinking under his fatigue died, I viewed the expanse before me with anguish, and when suddenly my eye caught a dark speck upon the dusky plain, I strained my sight to discover what it could be, and uttered a wild cry of ecstasy when I distinguished a sledge and the distorted proportions of a well-known form within. Oh, with what a burning gush did I hope revisit my heart! Warm tears filled my eyes, which I hastily wiped away, that they might not intercept the view that I had of the demon, but still my sight was dimmed by the burning drops until, giving way to the emotions that oppressed me, I wept aloud. But this was not the time for delay. I disencumbered the dogs of their dead companion, gave them plenty of portions of food, and after an hour's rest, which was absolutely necessary, and yet which was bitterly irksome to me, I continued my route. The sledge was still visible, nor did a again I lose sight of it, except at the moments when for a short time some ice rock concealed it with intervening crags. I indeed perceptibly gained on it, and when after nearly 2 days' journey I beheld my enemy at no more than a mile distance, my heart bounded within me. But now, when I appeared almost within grasp of my enemy, my hopes were suddenly extinguished, and I lost all trace of him more utterly than I had ever done before. A grand sea was ahead, and the thunder of its progress, as the waters rolled and swelled beneath me, became every moment more ominous and terrific. I pressed on, but in vain. The wind arose, the sea roared, and as with the mighty shock of an earthquake, it split, it cracked with tremendous and overwhelming sound. The work was soon finished, and in a few minutes a tumultuous sea rolled between me and my enemy, and I was left drifting on a scattered piece of ice that was continually lessening, and thus preparing me for a hideous death. In this manner many appalling hours passed. Several of my dogs died, and I myself was about to sink under the accumulation of distress when I saw your vessel riding at anchor and holding forth to me hopes of succour and life. I had no conception that vessels ever came so far north, and was astonished at the sight. I quickly destroyed part of my sledge to construct oars, and by these means was enabled with infinite fatigue to move my icy raft in the direction of your ship. I had determined, if you were going to southward still, to trust myself to the mercy of the seas rather than abandon my purpose. I hoped to induce you to grant me a boat with which I could still pursue my enemy, but your direction was northwards. You took me on board when my vigour was exhausted, and I should soon have sunk under my multiple hardships into a death which I still dread, for my task is unfinished. Oh, when will my guiding spirit, in conducting me to the demon, allow me to rest? So I must desire, or must die, and yet he lives. If I do, swear to me, Walton, that he shall not escape, that you will seek him and satisfy my vengeance in his death. Yes, I do dare ask you to undertake my pilgrimage, to endure the hardships that I have undergone. No, I am not so selfish. Yet when I am dead, if he should appear, if the ministers of vengeance should conduct him to you, swear that he shall not live, swear that he shall not triumph over my accumulated woes, and live to make another such a wretch as I am. He is eloquent and persuasive. Once his words had even power, even over my heart, but trust him not. His soul is as hellish as his form, full of treachery and fiend-like malice. Hear him not. Call him on the name of William, Justin, Cleverell, Elizabeth, my father and of my wretched Victor, and thrust your sword into his heart. I will hover near and direct the steel aright. Walton, in continuation, August the 26th, 17. You have read this strange and terrifying story, Margaret, and do you not feel your blood congealed with horror, like that which even now curdles mine? Sometimes, seized with sudden agony, he could not continue his tale. At others, his voice broken yet piercing, uttered with difficulty the words so replete with agony. His fine and lovely eyes were now lighted up with indignation, now subdued to downcast sorrow, and quenched in infinite wretchedness. Sometimes he commanded his countenance and tones, and related the most horrible incidents, which a tranquil voice suppressed every mark of agitation. Then, like a volcano bursting forth, his face would suddenly change in an expression of wildest rage, as he shrieked out on his perception. His tale is connected and told with an appearance of the simplest truth, yet I owe to you that the letters of Felix and Sapphi, which he showed me, and the apparition of the monster seen from our ship, brought to me the greatest conviction of the truth of his narrative than his assertions, however earnest and connected. Such a monster has there then really existed. I cannot doubt it. Yes, I am lost in surprise and admiration. Sometimes I endeavour to gain from Frankenstein the particulars of his creature's formation, but on this point he was impenetrable. "Are you mad, my friend?" he said, "or whither does your senseless curiosity lead you? Would you also create for yourself and the world a demoniacal enemy? Or to what do your questions tend? Peace, peace, learn my miseries, and do not seek to increase your own." Frankenstein discovered that I made notes concerning his history. He asked to see them, and then he himself corrected and augmented them in many places, but principally in giving the life and spirit to the conversations he held with his enemy. "Since you have persevered my narration," said he, "I would not that mutilated one should go down to posterity. Thus has a week passed away, while I have listened to the strangest tale that ever imagination formed. My thoughts and every feeling of my soul have been drunk up by the interest of my guest, for which this tale and his own elevated and gentle manners have created. I wish to soothe him, yet I can cost one or so infinitely reliable, so destitute of every hope, of one so infinitely miserable, so destitute of every hope of conclusion to live. Oh, no, the only joy that he can now know will be when he composes his shattered feelings to peace and death, yet enjoys one comfort, an offering of solitude and delirium. He believes that when in dreams he holds converse with his friends and describes from that consultation from his miseries and excitement to his vengeance, that they are not the creation of his fancy, but the real beings who visit him from the regions of the remote world. This faith, given the solemnity to his reverie, that render them to me almost as imposing and as interesting as truth. Our conversations are not always confined to his own history and his misfortunes. On every point of general literature he displays unbound knowledge and quick and piercing apprehension. His eloquence is forcible and touching, nor can I hear him when he relates the pathetic incident or endeavours to move the passions of pity or love without tears. What a glorious creature must he have been in the days of his prosperity, when he, thus noble and godlike in ruin, he seems to feel his own worth and the greatness of his fall. When younger, he said, I felt as if I was destined for some great enterprise. My feelings are profound, but I possessed a coldness of judgment that fitted me for illustrious adventures. This sentiment of the worth of my nature supported me when others would have been oppressed, for I destined it criminal to throw away in useless grief those talents on the work I had completed, no less the one that a creation of a sensation and rational animal. I could not rank myself with the herd of common projectors, but this feeling, which supported me in the commencement of my career, now serves only to plunge me into lower than dust. All my speculations and hopes are as soothing and like an archangel who aspires to omnipotence. I am chained in the internal hell. My imagination was vivid, yet my powers of analysis and application were intense. By the union of those qualities I conceived the idea and executed the creation of a man. Even now I cannot recollect without passion my reveries while the work was incomplete. I trod heaven in my thoughts, now exulting in my powers, now burning with the idea of their effects. From my infancy I was imbued with high hopes and lofty ambition, and how I am sunk. Oh, my friend, if you had known me as I once was, you would not recognise me in this stage of degradation. Despondency rarely visited my heart. A high destiny seemed to bear on me until I fell, never, never again to rise. Must I then lose this admirable being? I had longed for a friend. I had sought one who would sympathise and would love me. Behold, on these decent seas I have found such a one, but I fear I have gained him only to know his value and lose him. I would reconcile him to life, but he repulses the idea. I thank you, Walton, he said, for your kind intentions towards so miserable a wretch, but when you speak of new ties and fresh affections, think that you can replace those who are gone. Can any man be to me as Cheverel was, or any woman another Elizabeth? Even where the affections are not strongly moved by any superior excellence, the companions of our childhood always possess a certain power over our minds which hardly any later friend can obtain. They know our infantile dispositions, which, however they may be afterwards modified, are never eradicated, and they can judge our actions with more certain conclusions as to the integrity of our motives. A sister or a brother can never, unless indeed such sympathies have been shown earlier, suspect the other of fraud or false dealing. When another friend, however strongly he may be attached, may, in spite of himself, be invaded with suspicion. But I enjoy friends, dear, not only through habit and association, but from their own merits, and whenever I am, the soothing voice of my Elizabeth and the conversation of Cheverel will be forever whispered in my ear. They are dead, but one feeling in such solitude can persuade me to persevere my life. If I was engaged in any high undertaking of design, fraught with extensive utility to my fellow creatures, then I could live to fulfil it. But such is not my destiny. I must pause and destroy the being to whom I gave existence. Then my lot on earth will be fulfilled, and I may die. September the 2nd. My beloved sister, I write to you, encompassed by peril, and ignorant whether I am ever doomed to see you again, dear England, and the dearer friends that inhabit it. I am surrounded by mountains of ice, which admit no escape, and threaten every moment to crush my vessel. The brave fellows whom I have persuaded to be my companions look towards me for aid, but I have none to bestow. There is something terribly appalling in our situation, yet my courage and hopes do not desert me. We may survive, and if we do not, I will repeat the lessons of Seneca and die with a good heart. Yet what Margaret will be to the state of your mind, you will not hear of my destruction. You will be anxiously await my return. Years will pass, and you will have visitings of despair, and yet will be tortured by hope. O my beloved sister, the sickening failings of your heartfelt expectations are prospect more terrible to me than my own death. But you have a husband and lovely children, and you may be happy. Heaven bless you and make you so. My unfortunate guest regards me with the tenderest compassion. He endeavours to fill me with hope, and talks as if life were a possession which he valued. He reminds me how often the same accidents will happen to other navigations who have attempted this sea. In spite of myself, he fills me with cheerful auguries. Even the sailors feel the power of his eloquence, which when he speaks they no longer despair. He rouses their energies, and while they hear his voice, they believe these vast mountains of ice are molehills, which will vanish before the resolutions of man. These feelings are transitory. Each day's expectation delays fills them with fear, and I almost dread the mutiny caused by this despair. September the 5th. A scene has just passed of uncommon interest, that although it is highly probable that these papers may never reach you, yet I cannot forbear recording it. We are still surrounded by the mountains of ice, still in imminent danger of being crushed in their conflict. The cold is excessive, and many of my unfortunate comrades have already found the grave amidst this scene of desolation. Frankenstein has daily declined in health. A feverish fire still glimmers in his eyes, but he is exhausted, and when suddenly roused to any exertion, he speedily sinks again into apparent lifelessness. I mentioned this in my last letter, the fears I entertained of mutiny. The This morning, as I sat watching the wan countenance of my friend, his eyes half closed and his limbs hanging listlessly, I was roused by half a dozen of the sailors who desired admission into the cabin. They entered, and their leader addressed me. He told me that he and his companions had been chosen by the other sailors to come in deputation to me to make me a demand which is in justice I could not refuse. We were immured in ice and should probably never escape, but they feared that if, as it was possible, the ice should dissipate and free the passage be open, I should be rash enough to continue my voyage and lead them into fresh dangers, after they might happily have surmounted this. They desired, therefore, that I should engage with a solemn promise that if the vessel should be freed, I would instantly direct my course southwards. This speech troubled me. I had not despaired, nor had I yet conceived the idea of returning if set free. Yet I could, in justice, or even in possibility, refuse their demand. I hesitated before I answered, when Frankenstein, who had at first been silent and indeed appeared hardly to have force enough to attend, now roused himself. His eyes sparkled and his cheeks flushed with a momentary vigour. Turning towards the men, he said, "What do you mean? What do you demand of your captain? Are you then so easily turned from your design? Did you not call this a glorious expedition? And wherefore was it glorious? Not because of the way was smooth and placid as the southern sea, but because it was full of dangers and terror, because even now, in every new incident, your fortitude would be called forth and your courage exhibited, because danger and death surround, and these dangers you were to brave and overcome. For this was for this was an honourable undertaking. You were hereafter to be hailed as the benefactors of your species, your name adored, and as belonging to brave men who encountered death for honour and the benefit of mankind. And now, behold, with the first imagination of danger, or if you will, the first mighty and terrific trial of your courage, you shrink away and are content to be handed down as men who had not strength enough to endure cold and peril, and so, poor souls, they were chilly and returned to their warm firesides. Why, that requires not this preparation. You need not have come thus far and dragged your captain to the shame of defeat, merely to prove yourself cowards. Oh, be men, or be more than men, be steady to your purpose, and firm as a rock. This ice is not made of such stuff as your hearts might be, and it is enough, it cannot withstand you. If you say that it shall not, do not return to your families with the stigma of disgrace marked upon your brow. Return as heroes who have fought and conquered, and who know not what it is to turn their backs to the foe." He spoke this with a voice so modulated to the different feelings expressed in his speech, with an eye so full of lofty design and heroism, that you can wonder that these men were moved. They looked at one another and were unable to reply. I spoke. I told them to retire and consider what had been said, that I would not lead them further north if they strenuously desired the contrary, but I hoped that with reflection their courage would return. They retired and turned towards my friend, but he was sunk in languor and almost deprived of life. How all this will terminate I know not, but I had rather die than return shamefully, my purpose unfulfilled. Yet I fear such will be my fate. The men, unsupported by ideas of glory and honour, can never willingly continue to endure their present hardships. September the 7th. The die is cast. I have consented to return, if we are not destroyed. Thus my hopes blasted with cowardice and indecision, I come back ignorant and disappointed. It requires more philosophy than I possess to bear this injustice with patience. September the 12th. It is past. I am returning to England. I have lost my hopes of utility and glory. I have lost my friend. But I will endeavour to detail these bitter circumstances to you, my dear sister, and while I am wafted towards England and towards you, I will not despond. September the 9th, the ice began to move, and roarings like thunder were heard at the distance, as the island split and cracked in every direction. We were in the most imminent peril, but as we could only remain passive, my chief attention was occupied by my unfortunate guest, whose illness increased in such a degree that he was entirely confined to his bed. The ice cracked behind us and was driven with force towards the north. The breeze sprung from the west, and on the 11th the passage towards the south became perfectly free. When the sailors saw this, and their return to their native country was apparently assured, the shout of tumultuous joy broke from them, loud and long continued. Frankenstein, who was dozing, awoke and asked the cause of the tumult. They shout, I said, because they will soon return to England. Do you then really return? Alas, yes. I cannot withstand their demands. I cannot lead them unwillingly to danger, and I must return. Do so if you will, but I will not. You may give up your purpose, but mine is assigned to me by heaven, and I dare not. I am weak, but surely the spirits who assist my vengeance will endow me with the sufficient strength. Saying this, he endeavoured to spring from the bed, but the exertion was too great for him. He fell back and fainted. It was long before he was restored, and I often thought that life was entirely extinct. At length he opened his eyes, but he breathed with difficulty and was unable to speak. The surgeon gave him a composing draught and ordered us to leave him undisturbed. In the meantime he told me that my friend had certainly not many hours to live. His sentence was pronounced, and I could only grieve and be patient. I sat by his bed watching him. His eyes were closed, and I thought he slept. But presently he called to me in a feeble voice, and bidding me to come near, he said, Alas, the strength I relied on is gone. I feel that I shall soon die, and he, my enemy and persecutor, may still be in being. Think not, Walton, that in the last moments of my existence I feel that burning hatred and ardent desire of revenge I once expressed. I feel myself justified in desiring the death of my adversary. During these last days I have been occupied in examining my past conduct, nor do I find it blamable. In a fit of enthusiastic madness I created a rational creature, and was bound towards him to assure, as far as was in my power, his happiness and well-being. This was my duty, but there was another still paramount to that. My duties towards my fellow creature had greater claims to my attention, because they included a greater proportion of happiness or misery. Urged by this view, I refused, and I did right in refusing to create a companion for the first creature. He showed unparalleled malignity and selfishness and evil. He destroyed my friends. He devoured destruction, beings who possessed exquisite sensations, happiness and wisdom. Nor do I know where this thirst for vengeance may end. Miserable himself, that he may render no other wretched, he ought to die. The task of his destruction was mine, but I have failed. When, by selfishness and vicious motives, I asked you to undertake my unfinished work, and I renew this request now, when I am only induced by reason and virtue. Yet I cannot ask you to renounce your country and friends and to fill this task, and now that you return to England you will have little chance of meeting with him. But the consideration of this point and the well-balancing of what you may esteem your duties, I leave to you. My judgment and ideas are always disturbed by the near approach of death. I dare not ask you to do what I think right, for I may still be misled by passion. That he should live to be an instrument of mischief disturbs me. In other respects, in this hour, when I momentarily expect my release, this is the only happy one which I have enjoyed for several years. The forms of the beloved dead flit before me, and hasten me to their arms. Farewell, Walton. Seek happiness in tranquillity, and avoid ambition, even if it is only the apparently innocent one of distinguishing yourself in science and discoveries. Yet why do I say this? I have myself been blamed in these hopes, yet another may succeed. His voice became fainter, and as he spoke at length, exhausted by the effort, he sunk into silence. About half an hour afterwards he attempted again to speak, but was unable. He pressed my hand feebly, and his eyes closed forever, while the iridation of gentle smile passed away from his lips. Margaret, what comment can I make on the ultimate extinction of this glorious spirit? What can I say that will enable you to understand the depth of my sorrow? All that I should express would be inadequate and feeble. My tears flow, my mind is overshadowed by a cloud of disappointment, but I journey towards England, and I may there find consolation. I am interrupted. What do these sounds portend? It is midnight, the breeze blows fairly, and the watch on the desk scarcely stir. Again there is a sound of a human voice, but hoarser. It comes from a cabin where the remains of Frankenstein still lie. I must arise and examine. Good night, my sister. Great God, what a scene has just taken place. I am yet dizzy with the remembrance of it. I hardly know whether I shall have the power to detail it. Yet the tale which I have recorded would be incomplete without this final and wonderful catastrophe. I entered the cabin where lay the remains of my ill-fated and admirable friend. Over him hung a form which I cannot find words to describe, giant in stature, yet uncouth and distorted in its proportions, and as he hung over the coffin his face was concealed by long locks of ragged hair, but one vast hand was extended in colour and apparent texture like that of a mummy. When he heard the sound of my approach, he ceased to utter exclamations of grief and horror, and sprung towards the window. Never did I behold a vision so horrible as his face, such a loathsome yet appalling hideousness. I shut my eyes involuntarily and endeavoured to recollect what my duties with regard to this destroyer. I called on him to stay. He paused, looking on me with wonder, and again turning towards the lifeless form of his creator, he seemed to forget my presence, and every feature and gesture seemed instigated by the wider rage, by some uncontrollable passion. That is also my victim, he exclaimed. In his murder, my crimes are consummated. The miserable series of my being is wound to its close. O Frankenstein, generous and self-devoted being, what does it avail that I now ask thee to pardon me? I, who irretrievably destroyed thee by destroying all that thou loved. Alas, he is cold, he may not answer me. His voice seemed suffocated, and my first impulses, which had suggested to me the duty of obeying the dying request of my friend in destroying his enemy, were now suspended by a mixture of curiosity and compassion. I approached this tremendous being. I dared not again raise my looks upon his face. There was something so scary and unearthly in his ugliness. I attempted to speak, but the words died away on my lips. The monster continued to utter wild and incoherent self-reproaches. At length I gathered resolution to address him in a pause of the tempest of his passion. Your repentance, I said, is now superfluous. If you had listened to the voice of conscience and heeded the strings of remorse before you had urged your diabolical vengeance to this extremity, Frankenstein would yet have lived. And do you dream, said the demon, do you think that I was then dead to agony and remorse? He continued, pointing to the corpse, he suffered not more in the consummation of the deed, not a 10,000th portion of the anguish that was mine during the lingering detail of its execution. A frightful selfishness hurried on me, while my heart was poisoned with remorse. Think ye that the groan of Keverall were music to my ears? My heart was fashioned to be susceptible to love and sympathy, and when wretched by misery, to vice and hatred, it did not endure the violence of change without torture, such as you cannot even imagine. After the murder of Cleverell, I returned to Switzerland, heartbroken and overcome. I pitied Frankenstein. My pity amounted to horror. I abhorred myself, but when I discovered that he, the author at once of my existence and of its unspeakable torments, dared to hope for happiness, and that while he accumulated wretchedness and despair upon me, he sought his own enjoyment in feelings of passions from the indulgence of which I was forever barred, then impotency, envy, and bitter indignation filled me with an insatiable thirst for vengeance. I recalled my threat and resolved that it should be accomplished. I knew that I was preparing myself for a deadly torture, but I was the slave, not the master of an impulse which I detested yet could not disobey. Yet when she died, nay, then I was not miserable. I had cast off all feelings, subdued of anguish, to riot into the excess of my despair. Evil thenceforth became my good. Urged thus far, I had no choice but to adopt my nature to be an element which I had willingly chosen. The completion of my demoniacal design became an insatiable passion, and now it is ended. There is my last victim. I was at first touched by the expression of his misery, yet when I called to mind what Frankenstein had said of his powers of eloquence and persuasion, and when I again cast my eyes on the lifeless form of my friend, indignation was rekindled within me. "Wretch," I said, "it is well that you come here to whine over the desolation that you have made. You throw a torch into the pile of buildings when they are consumed. You sit among the ruins and lament the fall. Hypocritical fiend! If he who you mourn still lived, still you would be the object. Again you would become the prey of your accursed vengeance. It is not pity that you feel. You lament only because the victim of your malignity is withdrawn from your power." "Oh, it is not thus, not thus," interrupted the being. "Yet such must be the impression conveyed to you by what appears to be the purpose of my actions. Yet I seek not fellow feelings in my misery. No sympathy may I ever find. When I first sought it, it was the love of virtue, the feelings of happiness and affection which my whole being overflowed, that I wished it to be participated. But now that virtue has become to me a shadow, and the happiness and affection are turned into bitter and loathing despair in what I should seek for sympathy. I am content to suffer alone, while my suffering shall endure when I die. I am well satisfied that an abhorrence should load my memory. Once my fancy was soothed with dreams of virtue, of fame and of enjoyment. Once I falsely hoped to meet with beings who pardoned my outward form and who'd love me for the excellent qualities which I was capable of bringing forth. I was nourished with high thoughts of honour and devotion, but now vice and degradation me beneath the meanest of animals. No crime, no mischief, no malignity, no misery can be found comparable to mine. When I call over the frightful catalogue of my deeds, I cannot believe that I am he whose thoughts were once filled with sublime and transcendent visions of beauty and the majesty of goodness. But as even so, the fallen angel becomes a malignant devil. Even thy enemy of God and man had friends and associates in his desolation. I am quite alone. You who call Frankenstein your friend seem to have a knowledge of my crimes and his misfortunes, but in the detail which he gave you of them, he could not sum up the hours and months of misery which I endured, wasting in impotent passions. For whilst I destroyed his hopes, I did not satisfy my own desires. They were ever ardent and craving, till I desired love and fellowship, and I still was spurned. Was there no injustice in this? Am I to be thought to be only a criminal when all humankind sins against me? Why do you not hate Felix, who drove his friend from his door with... Why do you not execrate the rustic who sought to destroy the Saviour of his child? Nay, these are virtuous and immaculate beings. I, the miserable and abandoned, am an abortion, to be spurned at and kicked and trampled on. Even now my blood boils at the recollection of this injustice. But it is true that I am a wretch. I have murdered the lovely and the helpless. I have strangled the innocent as they slept, and grappled to death his throat who never injured me or any other living thing. I have devoted my Creator, the select specimen of all that is worthy of love and admiration among men, to misery. I have pursued him even to that irredeemable ruin. There he lies, white and cold in death. You hate me, but your abhorrence cannot equal that with which I regard myself. I look on the hands which executed the deed. I think on the heart in which the imagination of it was conceived, and long for the moment when they will meet my eyes, when it will haunt my thoughts no more. Fear not that I shall be the instrument of future mischief, for my work is nearly complete. Neither yours or any man's death is needed to consummate the series of my being, and accomplish that which must be done, but it requires my own. Do not think that I shall slow to perform this sacrifice. I shall quit your vessel on the ice craft which brought me hither, and I shall seek the most northerly extremity of the globe. I shall collect my funeral pile and consume to ashes this miserable frame, that its remains may afford no light to any curious and unhallowed wretch who would create such another as I have been. I shall die. I shall no longer feel the agonies which now consume me, or be the prey of feelings unsatisfied yet unquenched. He is dead who called me into being, and when I shall be no more, the very remembrance of us both will speedily vanish. I shall no longer see the sun or the stars or feel the winds play on my cheeks. Light, feelings and senses will pass away, and in this condition I must find my happiness. Some years ago, when the images which this world affords first opened up upon me, when I felt the cheering warmth of summer and heard the rustling of leaves as the chirruping of the birds, these were all new to me. I should have wept to die. Now it is my only consolation. Polluted by crimes and torn by the bitterest remorse, where can I find rest but in death? Farewell, I leave you, and in your last humankind, whom these eyes will ever behold. Farewell, Frankenstein. If thou wert yet alive, and yet cherished a desire to revenge against me, it would be better satisfied in my life than in my destruction. But it was not so. Thou didst seek my extinction, that I might not cause greater wretchedness. And if yet in some mode unknown to me thou hast not yet ceased to think and feel, thou desirest not my life for my own misery. Blasted as thou wert, my agony will still superior to thine, for the bitter sting of remorse may not cease to rankle in my wounds until the death shall close me for ever. But soon, he cried with sad and solemn enthusiasm, I shall die, and what I now feel be no longer felt. Soon these burning miseries will extinct. I shall ascend my funeral pile triumphantly and exalt the agony of the torturing flames. The light of the configuration will fade away. My ashes will be swept into the sea by the winds. My spirit will sleep in peace. Or if he thinks, it will be not surely to think thus. Farewell! He sprung from the cabin window, and as he said this, upon the ice raft which lay close to the vessel, he was soon borne away by the waves and lost in the dark distance.